So we have to discuss nuclear and renewable energies.
Yeah.
Can we even get to renewable energies, to 100% renewable energies without going for nuclear? Can we avoid using nuclear, which many people would like to, particularly Germany? They've already made this transition, which is proving very questionable and very traumatic, considering the blackmail from Russia. So where can we go from there? We have Claudia with us, who is, perhaps you can, rather than me introducing everybody, perhaps you can give us an introduction to who you are and then introduce your subject, okay? Shall we start with you, Claudia? You are the guest.
Thanks, sure. So I'm from Italy, and I'm a researcher in nuclear. And I have been working abroad for about 8 years in different countries, where I studied and researched materials performance in nuclear power plants, like nuclear fission power plants. And now I'm back to Italy, and I work for a nuclear fusion centers, since in Italy we closed our nuclear power plants after Chernobyl accident. And so yeah, I'm here, and I'm happy to talk about nuclear and try to maybe reverse the question, like, why are you against the nuclear? Because it is proven that it's a very safe source of energy and electricity. It has been reported, it's a fact. And it is green because it's low carbon, it's very low carbon. We have like similar emissions as for wind, and even less than solar. It has a really small footprint, land footprint, and it is a constant source of electricity. We can work together with renewables and supply the base load with nuclear energy. So to me, it's a question on the people that are against the nuclear. Why are you against it, given the facts? I don't know. I'm here to try to discuss and understand the other point of view, I guess.
Claudia, well, you're obviously a supporter of nuclear. Well, let's look at that. You've looked at the positive aspects of nuclear. We can perhaps look at what people are worried about in the nuclear.
Yeah.
And perhaps we could carry on with Anders, if you could introduce yourself and introduce your thinking about it.
I did a little different. I made a PowerPoint presentation or something like it, the open office. So I'll just share that, and I hope you will be okay with that. I'm a doctor of physics, and therefore I will today mostly talk about economics. So the first question is, which of these cars are green? We have a petrol Volvo and an electric Tesla. I'll just give you 10 seconds to think.
For me, it's Tesla.
It's a Volvo because it's standing still in the parking lot. The Tesla is actually driving. And there is an important point of this, and that is, forget about the car, look at the fuel. The car doesn't do anything in itself. It's the burning of the fuel that has a carbon emission and what hurts the climate. And that goes both for the petrol car, but also for the electric car if there's some kind of fuel burning as part of the electricity supply. That differs. My point is, solving the climate problem is actually really easy. I ran for parliament on that platform, and I wasn't elected. But the thing is, economists agree to a very, very high degree what to do. And that is, you need a carbon price all over the economy, either with a tax or with a quota system. And I have shown you here a wonderful book by one of the last Europeans to win the Nobel Prize in Economics, Jean Tirole. And just 30 pages of that book shows you about the climate economics and how it works. And the point is, we need to use all the wisdom of the individuals, of the companies and the consumers to find out how to do it. And you do that with a tax or quota. That is the only way. It's the only efficient way. The benefit is for the taxpayers that the carbon money is tax coming in for the tax itself or for the quotas, as long as you have some emissions, rather than politicians spending money on carbon projects. Don't have to pick investors either. You remember Obama and the solar cells and so on. So don't let climate policy be an excuse to bring back Soviet-style planned economy. Don't do it. I was a very proud aimer, that is an individual member of ALDE, that we got our mother party to support an expansion, I don't know how I spelled that, but still, of the quota scheme at the last year's Congress. And one more thing, if you do it economically, you don't need a color scheme for investments, whether it's green or yellow or whatever. Don't worry about it. The market will solve it. However, and this is spoiler alert, nuclear is absolutely green. And why is that? Here I've just shown a neutron hammering into a uranium atom, and it gives something like 200 mega electron volts here and 3 neutrons. If you want to bomb the world, then you use all of them. If you want not to, then you stop 2 of them and use the 3rd. The point is, this is mega electron volts. What chemistry is made of is something like electron volts, 10 or whatever. So the point is, there's orders of magnitude more energy in the nucleus than there is in the whole atom, which is kind of counterintuitive, but that is the way it is. And here, the Department of Energy has shown this, that in one little pellet of 2.5 centimeters of uranium, you get the same as 1 ton of coal or these 450 liters of oil and whatnot. The point is very, very, very energy dense. Whereas the coal, you burn it, you release CO2. Gas, you burn it, you release CO2, a little more efficient, but still wind, hydro, nuclear, and so on is basically 0. Then sometimes you hear, oh, gas is low emission, nuclear is low emission, but that is a misunderstanding, because gas is only low when you compare it to coal. So that is a good spin of the gas industry. Nuclear is low in the same sense as hydro and so on. That is, it's nothing in itself, but if you count what is taken to build the plant and so on, then it has something to get the stuff out of the ground. And here is what the climate panel thinks, the US climate panel. You see coal, gas around half, and then you have solar, wind, and so on, nuclear in the bottom. And in the EU, estimates are even that nuclear is half of wind and that kind of thing. You can discuss the numbers, but either nuclear is the cleanest or among the cleanest. I look at this map daily, where you have the energy mixture of different countries. Here I have France, mostly nuclear, and then even a bit of wind and gas and so on. You can see Poland, always red, unfortunately, a lot of coal. Sorry, brother. You have Denmark and France in between. And the point is, in Germany, they talked a lot about Energiewende and spent a lot of money on solar. And in Denmark, we talked a lot about wind. But what's always green is due to nuclear, France and Ontario, or due to hydro, Norway and Quebec. That is the 2 efficient ways always to have clean green energy. There is no other. Thank you.
So we can mark you firmly in the nuclear field. So we have 2 pro-nuclear. Let's see what Ben has to say. And we'll leave Pavel as the data guy for the end. Let's see what he comes up with. Ben, please.
Hello, thank you for organizing this panel. Thank you for attending this event. My name is Ben Burgers. I do not have any particular profession or education in energy, but as someone who works in IT, my job depends a lot on electricity. I would call myself, among many things, a green liberal, and I'm a renewable energy enthusiast and friend of the planet. I like to apply this in my life, from the big things to investing in renewable stocks to the small things like switching off the light when I leave the room. My position on this topic is very pragmatic. On one hand, I realize the energy transition cannot be too sudden because we do not have the capacity or the funds to switch to renewable energy too quickly. On the other hand, there are many reasons we cannot dawdle. In terms of climate change, we have no time to waste, but also in terms of public health and security. We want to leave a clean and habitable planet to next generations. We want to be able to breathe clean air, live out healthy lives, and keep health expenses low. We also shouldn't want to depend on states that violate human rights or go to war for our energy. The last part is very topical, considering what is happening in Ukraine right now. The European Union depends for 41.1% of its natural gas on Russia, and most gas pipelines run through Ukraine. We also know the violations of human rights and instability in the Middle East and their dependency on oil exports. For our own sake, we must deliver ourselves from our dependencies on other countries, or these specific countries, if any. For their sake, they should diversify their economy so they will have a more robust economy that runs on people's talent and not natural resources that are in the hands of only a few. In terms of burning fossil fuels and coal, I only need to mention emissions of particulate matter and toxic gases that end up in our lungs. Especially with COVID-19, focus is on our respiratory system, so it would be a good idea to keep this in mind when we talk about energy production as well. On climate change, I do not have to say much. Of course, there are some who deny human involvement in climate change, but surely there's near unanimity in the scientific community's opinion that we do have a role in this. If we don't want more floods, more extinction of the endangered species, more extreme weather, or briefly just a habitable planet, we must rethink our energy sources. Is nuclear an option? Perhaps wherever renewable is not feasible in the short term. In the long term, we should move away from nuclear fission as well, unless we are able to have nuclear fusion, not fission, as an alternative. Nuclear waste is a menace for many years. It is definitely not cheaper, and although it may be one of the safest sources of energy, even though the chance is very small, whenever a disaster happens, it will be a huge disaster, not a small disaster. Nevertheless, we must realize we can transition to renewable overnight. On a case-by-case and country-by-country basis, we should look at what mixture of energy sources is feasible and wise. I'm looking forward to a great discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So you are rather on the green side and non-nuclear side. And last but not least, Paweł.
Yes, thank you, Piotr. My name is Paweł. I come from Poland, as Anders mentioned, the most polluting due to the coal plants country, but I've been living in the Netherlands for a long time now, and I'm a researcher. Well, I work professionally and specialist in simulations, and my interest is more into technical analysis of energy networks and also adoption, as well as impact of distributed generation of electricity. As a preparation for this meeting, Piotr asked us earlier to think of a scenario whether it's possible indeed to come at some point to a world where we have electricity generation by 100% renewables without a transition phase through nuclear fission. Well, the simple answer as a modeler is, it depends. It depends. It probably we can, but it's extremely uncertain. We can fairly rely on what's our energy mix at the moment, but what's it going to be in 10 or 20 years? That's still a big question. And I would like to mention a few points later on why is that so difficult to analyze what can happen in the future. Well, also leaving aside what is actually renewables, whether it's not, whether we can consider nuclear fission as renewable. That's fortunately not my job, and I'm not gonna say it is or it is not. It's also worth mentioning that most of this kind of analysis is always done on national level. We don't really look at broader spectrum, which is here quite important, and also at times time scale is quite important. EU, for instance, has targets of certain emission levels or energy mix or whatever. And that time scale, whether we want to adhere to it, is of course a big economic question. But for me, again, it's a little bit less interesting. I'm really keen on the technology itself and the problem of what's actually out there to model energy. Traditionally, these kind of problems were a little bit neglected. Companies and research was done mostly in terms of load balancing. So is our electricity network stable enough? And if I add this new coal plant or whatever, am I reliable enough to always supply electricity and avoid a blackout? And then there was another lane in that was economic adoption and generally economic models of whether this technology is something we want to adopt, and both in terms of consumers, but as well as decision makers. However, we know that the world isn't as simple as that. In fact, we say energy here in this webinar, but we actually mean electricity. What is more to that, and what is very closely connected, is actually heat and fuel. Anders mentioned it, which car is more green? We really have an alternative how it's more than electricity. And also more than suddenly emerging energy storage and conversion and all that we can do with perhaps excess energy. Current trends also start looking beyond a bit emissions and types of emissions. Traditionally CO2, maybe some sulfur, but now we also have noise or other pollutants that are a part and are really part not only of the model, but also economic and broader view of certain technologies. And in total life cycle costs of technologies, we know that solar cell has also certain costs in rare minerals that we use, and it's not entirely green as we would like it to be, even though we're going always in the right direction. Then a big part is also distributed energy generation, how consumers but also governments think of smaller energy generators. Very traditionally, where we had large power plants, and now we slowly accept that landscape is changing, and we will have much more fragmented generation, and that the reasons for the decision making about it is we no longer consider agents making decisions as rational. We know that in a lot of, especially consumers, but also political decisions, people do not act rationally, and that is a huge problem in the adoption. What's going to happen? Why is this nuclear plant that on paper looks very nice, why is it not used? It's of course about emotions. And of course, we have then environmental conditions related to that, as well as incentives in terms of subsidies or maybe penalization of certain technologies that promote or discourage usage of certain things. To me, one of the bigger issues in terms of what can happen in the future is technological advancements. We generally hope that things will not stay the same. We have huge technological advancement in recent years. So things like energy storage or cheap energy storage is going to be possible, and that can help us adopt more technologies like solar or wind that requires us to store energy in order to use it later. And finally, also something that needs to be looked on is spatial and urban planning. That's quite often neglected. Power generators need space, and we need to put them in the right positions, not only where the conditions are the greatest, but also where they are the least nuisance. People don't want things like that, plants in their neighborhood, and that is also an interesting point to look into. So all in all, plenty of things to look at in energy modeling, and I'm excited to talk about them today.
Okay, thank you, Pavel. Well, we had a very comprehensive roundup of the issues involved, and we sort of have two pro-nuclear so far, two rather green. I would, to position myself, but my background is not scientific, I'm afraid. I'm just humble editorial background. I was in journalism for practically my whole professional life. Therefore, I try to cover whatever subject comes my way, but I don't have your kind of scientific background. But my personal leaning would be 100% green, 100% renewables, but that seems a bit of wishful thinking, and I wish it could happen tomorrow and in a month's time. But after discussing with Pavel the other day about the costs of such a solution, even if it was feasible in the short term, it would be absolutely staggering. Even if we did want to invest all of our money in it, it would be just probably not feasible. So we have to be pragmatic. We have to think about nuclear energy as a must, particularly as France has done so well with it. But the big question about nuclear energy is not whether it's useful, is not whether it's cost effective, and it's immensely powerful. It's also immensely dangerous. It's immensely dangerous. It's also, when it goes right, it's wonderful. We have relatively cheap energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unless there's a breakdown like in France. They have a few reactors which are not being maintained at the moment. But when something goes wrong, like in Chernobyl or Fukushima or 3 Mile Island, or in Switzerland, which nobody remembers, it was during the early 50s, there was a sizable meltdown, but luckily it was inside the mountains, so we just closed the mountain and forgot it. Things get completely out of control. It can be very, very drastic. So in a country like, let's say, Germany or the UK, France is a fairly big territory, not very densely inhabited, but smaller countries or more densely inhabited have a problem. So let's have perhaps an exchange between the panelists first, and then we'll go to the audience on their questions and opinions. Have any questions so far among the panelists?
Concerning your opinion that like obviously nuclear is cost effective, is green, but you mentioned that it's dangerous. You mentioned the word dangerous. And I need to point on that word, because if you look at the deaths per kilowatt hour of electricity produced, considering also all the accidents that happen, nuclear is one of the safest source of electricity. And I'm a chemical engineer actually by education, but I've always been working on nuclear, in nuclear fission and now fusion. And I know about chemicals accident. So when people say to me that nuclear is dangerous, I say, wait, I know that have been some bad accidents, so we don't want to say that nothing has happened. So we know that Chernobyl has been a really bad accident, people died. But if you compare, even in that situation that was a not normal operation of a civil reactor, you know what I mean? Even the deaths of a very, very extreme anyway accident, because we had release of fission products and there was no containment vessel. Even in that situation, the deaths, even though they are a bad thing, deaths were even way less than some chemical accident like Bhopal in India have way more deaths than Chernobyl. And Fukushima, the plant in Japan, everyone knows about the accident, and Germany has decided to shut down the nuclear power plants after Fukushima. But we need to remember that the nuclear power plants survived 9.2 earthquake, a super huge tsunami wave. 20,000 people died for the tsunami, but no people died because of the presence of the nuclear power plant. So to me, even in the worst scenario, I cannot see a danger in having civil nuclear power plants. because it really nothing happened due to radiation. And again, as a chemical engineer, the explosion was a hydrogen explosion. So for me, it's not correct saying it is dangerous, because we have to compare the perception of danger or risks to what is the numbers, the real facts, I believe.
I'd like other people to reply to that. We have a question already from the audience, but we have we said let's the panelists first exchange a bit ideas, then we will go to the audience. So Pavel.
Yes, thank you. In general, I must agree with Claudia that nuclear is a very safe technology. Looking from analytic standpoints, yeah, I don't think we ever had a safer technology, to be honest, on such a scale. Yet I would like to question rather the cost efficiency. Recently, we've been building very, very few new plants. And all the attempts we had, at least in Western world, they've proven to be very problematic, not only from emotional standpoint, but also from cost efficiency. And it's not about the fuel itself, but it's about designing and operating a nuclear power plant. I was briefly involved in a bid for the British Hinkley Point C. And when I saw some numbers regarding the required price for electricity that the government would agree to pay for 30 years, that I was, to be honest, extremely against that investment decision, because well, this is the environment that we have. Companies try to make profit, and these are very long-term investments, and they already from the beginning negotiate this kind of deals that have nothing to do really with technology, but are more investment decisions that that end up to be very problematic for in the future, and it's really a very long-term decision. So there I would be quite careful.
Thank you, Pavel. Anders.
I was just inspired by the last thing Pavel said, and I think I agree with that, that there's something with the economics in the long term for building new power plants that has to be looked at. However, there's one important thing in that, and that is, do the other technologies pay the real price for the carbon emission? And are the nuclear recognized for the ways that it stabilizes the power supply in a way that wind and solar cannot? So there's some things there, and I'm not sure on the economics. I have an open mind on that. I would just like to say on the danger that I agree with Claudia. There are very, very few deaths per kilowatt produced, but also looking back to Chernobyl all the time. That was 35 years ago. I mean, just imagine how much sensor technology has developed, computer systems to look at the things. If we consider technology today and look at how it was done 35 years ago, we don't look at 35-year-old solar panels and see how efficient they would be. Not to mention, I think there was an accident in China that killed more people with a hydropower accident than Chernobyl did. So I think there's some kind of, we all got very frightened at that time, so we compare everything with nuclear to Chernobyl, but Chernobyl will not happen again. The Soviet Union is dead, for one thing. It's just not a fair way to compare it. And then on the waste thing, what should we do with the waste? I saw that question arising too. I tend to say, what is the problem exactly? Now we've had these power plants for 60 years. They have just collected the waste and put them in some boxes in the power plants. Typically, they don't do any harm there. Where is the village that has been abandoned because it was not safe to play there? Where is the damage? And if we can do that in 60 years, we can continue to do that. And actually now some of the oldest waste is being used as new fuel for some new plants. So I don't see a big problem there either. But on the economics, I have an open mind.
Thank you, Anders. Claudia, and then we will take the audience. Already have a question lined up from Renato Polato, and then I can see Zia is queuing up. So Claudia.
Yes, I would like to maybe show a slide on the fact that we were mentioning about the long time the nuclear power plants are needed now to be built, because I think it's quite interesting if I can show a slide. It's true that Olkiluoto, which has anyway got critical like a few weeks ago. So it was the first EPR reactor being built in like 25 years in Europe. So it is true that Olkiluoto in Finland, Hinkley Point C in the UK are taking more time to be built than what was supposed to be. And of course, the delay is increasing the cost. But if you compare the amount of time needed for nuclear power plant to be built in the Western country and Eastern country, you can see this graph, which actually is from Frédéric Joubert, Boston Consulting Group. So you can see here then we had a stop in the Western countries. We didn't build any nuclear power plants during the 90s and up to 2000, mid 2000. And this means that the supply chain was not longer there in Europe. And you can see here are the months taken for the power plants to be built in US and France. So of course, if you compare the time needed for a nuclear power plant to be built in France, or let's say Hinkley Point C Olkiluoto, it seems that it's taken a long time. But we need to remember that the industry stopped to build this nuclear power plant for 20 years. Now, France announced to build 8 new EPRs, and we will be able to again build the nuclear power plants with a supply chain that works. And so if you compare the time spent in Korea or China, you take way less time to build them, just because they never stopped. Since the 70s, they kept building their nuclear power plants. I think what we need to remember is not only to look at Olkiluoto and Hinkley Point C, realize that we stopped to build nuclear power plants. Now we are slowly getting there, but when we will build many, many nuclear power plants, like we will do, like France announced it, Poland announced it, it will be a smoother construction plan. That's what I wanted to point out, and I hope it's useful.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, you have a good point that the huge delays and the huge cost overruns in building power plants, nuclear power plants, first of all, they are constantly trying new technologies, and there are these very long gaps in their time between the plant's construction. We have a question from Renato Polato. To make decisions, I think we have to consider the time we have available. I would like someone to tell me whether it is better to have a planet with a lot of nuclear waste that we will leave to future generations, or a planet without nuclear waste, but no longer habitable within a few decades because of the CO2 emitted has pushed us past the point of no return. So this is a question from Renato Polato. I see that Claudia is already lining up to answer. Go ahead.
Yes, sir, I have my hands raised from earlier, but of course, like I'm a pro-nuclear, and I've worked in waste management. So I think people also, so I totally agree that we can just use nuclear power plants, because the waste that people think, oh my God, it's a long-term active radioactive waste. Literally, if you were to use all your energy, electricity from nuclear, the waste that you generate, the high-level waste, would really be like a disc like this, okay, like a centimeter. This is the volume of the waste for each person. And without considering that we are now recycling the waste. Well, it has been done in the past. We stopped it, but now Russia restarted to recycle the waste. So the volume, it's really not big at all. So you literally have, like, let's say, like a little disc like this. And with the recycling technology that we are now in place in Russia, and that I hope it will be implemented in other countries, the radioactive waste will be even smaller in volume. And more importantly, radioactive for way less time. So instead of like 100,000 of years, it will only be radioactive for 300 years, which is literally like, I mean, you know, toxic metals are toxic forever. So I totally agree that we can live with like a little bit of, I mean, some canisters with some radioactive waste in there. I mean, I worked on it, so I would be happy to have a repository, you know, beneath my house.
Thank you, Claudia. Zia was trying to ask a question. Go ahead, Zia.
Thank you for organizing this meeting. Well, I do have a question. I wanted to add one point about the environmental pollution and the things you mentioned. Well, although the environmental movement has historically rejected the nuclear energy option, I think the new generation reactor and new technologies that fully recycle waste and incorporate passive safety systems and like those things might resolve their concern and ought to be more widely understood in terms of environmental pollution and environmental harm, because there is no perfect energy source, and however conservation professionals, particularly in for example in Wageningen environmental policy chair, they like conservation professionals ultimately need to take an evidence-based approach to consider carefully the integrated effects of energy mixes on biodiversity conservation. Also, another point I wanted to mention about policy implication of the economic effects of disaggregate and aggregate energy consumption, economic growth, and political institutional quality on environmental pollution. Well, first of all, I think a paradigm shift from energy from energy and carbon incentives industries to more precisely on service-oriented economy, which will cause a structural economic change and thus aiding in the mitigation of climate change. Well, and its impacts. And secondly, it reminds me that there is a need for technological advancement in the manufacturing industries, in the power sector, that employ advanced technologies such as like the whole instruction of the carbon emission system, as Dr. Basfol mentioned, or the carbon capture and storage system, among others, in order to promote energy efficiency and also a structural change, which will depend on the willingness by the government to promote those particular policies to decarbonize the economy.
Thank you, Zia. Yes, let's turn the, it's a bit sort of nuclear versus everybody else, nuclear versus all the other energies. In fact, what we need to look probably for is nuclear and other sources, renewable sources of energy. Coming back to Fukushima, I'm not trying to gang up on nuclear, but Fukushima, if you know Japanese people, I had the pleasure to spend some time in Japan. They're obsessively checkers and double checkers, very obsessively precise, and they are obsessively concerned with safety, even for simple things. I worked with the television there, and God, they had one machine and a second machine and a third machine to replace it just in case the second one collapsed. And if the Japanese, with their obsession with cleanliness, reliability, safety, managed to screw up so badly with Fukushima, what we common people, mortals like Italians or Poles or other less obsessive people, what chance do we have of not screwing up? But this is, let's put this to rest. It's true that it hasn't been such a huge thing. But what I also like, before I give a voice to Ben and Anders, we should also speak about saving energy when possible, or wasting, not so much saving, but wasting less, and also how to distribute this energy and how to manage it better. Ben, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't have so much remark, rather a question with regard to nuclear waste, also a bit about disasters, because the radiation may stay for many years, even in Fukushima. And I was wondering if the scientific community is also doing research into neutralizing radiation. I mean, it's very hard. We also have to distinguish alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. But that could be a solution to the nuclear waste as well as the disaster problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Anders.
I think concerning Fukushima, that a lot of it has been confused about the nuclear accident and then the tsunami with all the people who drowned in that. That was a real disaster there. There was an accident at Fukushima, of course there was, and I think I heard one person died of radiation, but there was a nuclear accident, and how it could happen, it's a good question. I think, like all other accidents, like with the planes, we learn from each of them, and I think there's something with the cooling water and other things, and active and passive, and I shouldn't ask about that. It's for Claudia to explain maybe, but I would just like to say, to Sia's point on the economy and decarbonizing, and also to your question about saving energy, Piotr, that I think it's good to save energy. I mean, it's a great way to save your money and save the climate and so on. But the point is, if you look at the carbon emissions and tax those or have the quota system, then you don't have to care whether people use more or less energy. If they use more energy, then it has to be green. It's the overall carbon emission. That's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter whether we cut down a bit and save a bit on and make it a little less intensive. We can also spend more energy if it's all green. It doesn't matter. So we have too many goals in Europe. We don't need to have a goal of spending less energy. Why? It doesn't matter. Just have lower carbon emissions. That's the point. We just need the one goal, and we need the economic incentives to deal with that correctly, including also giving the benefit to the nuclear for having the base load and so on. But I think we should just make the market decide, setting the rules. We don't want emissions, and then let the market do the rest.
Thank you, Anders. Well, I have a beef with people keeping their engine running, leaving their car and leaving the engine running for half an hour because the petrol is cheap, or keeping air conditioning running and doors and windows open because energy is cheap. And energy is very expensive, and we scream when energy is expensive, but we still waste it. But still, Claudia.
And the car kills with particulates. Sorry.
Yes. Claudia.
Yeah, so I'm really eager to reply to all the points that we touched in the past few minutes. So regarding your point of view, which I totally agree that in the Western countries where we waste, let's say, energy and electricity, we should also focus to maybe try to efficiently, like better use of our energy and electricity sources. But we need to remember that, as we mentioned earlier, electricity just accounts for a really little percentage of our, of the emissions that we produce. And all the, countries that are yet to develop, we have to give them a chance to have our lifestyle. So there's not a point of having to diminish our consumption, because we will have any way to have way more energy and electricity needs because of the other countries that have to reach our benefits. So we need to give everyone access to electricity and energy. So we still need to have a source of energy, electricity that is clean, not for maybe us, but for the other countries that want more energy because they want to develop. And then I think about Fukushima. I agree. I worked in Japan as well. So I worked a little bit in Hitachi, GE, that is a, they build nuclear power plants. So I know, Piotr, how they are really, detailed and very, polite, and they will, they have a really great working culture. The fact was that the design of that power plant had the diesel generators really in the lower ground. So what happened in Fukushima is just that, unfortunately, when the tsunami came and the power plant resisted the earthquake, 9.2, so a 30-year-old power plant survived a 9.2 earthquake that we will never have in Europe. Anyway, so a 30-year-old power plant survived. Then the waves happened and flooded the diesel generators. And what happened is that we didn't have electricity to make the pump work. So unfortunately, it was a really, really, let's say, cooling circuit issue. So we just really didn't have the coolant that could, cool our core. But it was the design of 30 years old. And after Fukushima, the nuclear power plant industry has worked a lot on improving the design of the current power plants that are working nowadays. So I don't know if you know, but in Japan, they stopped all nuclear power plants, they revamped them, so they improved safety measures, and this was done in the entire nuclear power plant fleet in the world. So this sort of like detailed improving are making the nuclear power plants even safer. And then from the point of view of another question that was, why don't we reduce the radioactivity, neutralize radioactivity? Well, that's the point of recycling the waste that we talked about earlier. So thanks to, let's say, some reactors that do not work with water, or actually not quite as water, we can basically destroy those really long radioactive wastes that we have to keep for hundreds and thousands of years away from, human touch. So that's our technology, and the technology is already being proven. It has worked in the 60s, so it's nothing new. It was stopped because of issues of cost and other aspects, technical aspects. But Russia has one plant now that works with that technology. So we literally destroy the radioisotopes that are really long-lasting. And we basically we split them, and we have a radioisotope that are just a bit lower in their let's say radioactivity life. And then just another thing, radioactivity anyway, it's everywhere around us. But so we cannot neutralize radiation anyway, because just by living, we are, irradiated by the sun and the ground. So we just need to make sure that we can seal and close the radioactivity that is too dangerous for us. But we did it, and we are doing it for like 60 years.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. You made some good points there, but it's true, but we are evolving technology which should allow us to do things. Question when we will get there, but still, when a sizable chunk of a country is neutralized for decades, if not centuries, like Chernobyl or Fukushima, it's a big concern, particularly a very heavily populated country like Japan. And if it happened in the heart of Europe, we would be slightly accommodated. Pavel.
Yes, thank you. Well, but you say if it happened, but it didn't. And I think that's the best display of how safe it is. In 60 years, there were two major incidents. One with all the Soviet cover-up and screw-up didn't end up to be so bad, and the other one also proved that the technology is solid. but there's some work to be done on the design of the structures themselves. And that also brings us to the fact that we learn from design, we don't learn from disasters. And that is pretty good in this terms of technology. But I would like to maybe come back to my opening statement that a lot of these decisions are made based on emotions, and unfortunately not only emotions of individuals, but also policymakers. I would strongly argue that the German decision to abolish nuclear is one of those, and it's really simple because it's difficult to be against renewables. They don't have any significant waste. No one sees how they are really produced, and what kind of supply chain is there, which is sometimes also quite scary. But once I put my solar panels on the roof, they look nice, and then they give me free electricity for 30 years. Again, no emissions, all nice. So it's difficult to be against it, while it's quite easy to be against other solutions that are different, and not considering the fact that we create many different problems with renewables that are also considered by individuals then not my problem, which is especially load balancing, and the fact that we are on larger scale still unable to store energy that is produced, and a lot of it just simply goes to waste, which we try not to admit on busy days, and that's a big shame. So if anything, I would go into the direction of a really holistic view, and really mentioning this kind of issues that we don't do enough.
I have here a very, very long message from Silvano. Silvano, would you like to come up and sort of perhaps ask the question yourself, but perhaps in a slightly more concise form?
My English is not the best, so I prefer to write. So
well, it's very well written. Well, I'll try if you want.
Okay, the first, I think that just a few things. I go to these points. First one, for me, we must look at actual technology, not at future technology that are far away, like storage and so, because the amount of energy to store is enough, and is a problem for days or weeks that we haven't renewable energy to have a solution for this. So we must think a solution that is stable, because we have risk blackouts and so. The second one is a big economic question that I make to Powell. If he has a measure of the impact of the cost of energy and GDP, gross domestic product. So the model, is there a model about this? Because gross domestic product is important for peoples in our for us in general. Okay. For me, about the nuke, I think that in Italy is quite impossible. We have 2 referendum that say no nuke in Italy. I live about 5 kilometers from a reactor in Rome, the only 2 reactors that are in Rome for medical purpose. So we have about 18 temporary vast deposit, and nobody has idea to where to store the vast. And in Gabon there is a natural reactor that about 1 million of years ago that move that is under the ground and move about 4 meters from his location in about million of years. So to store vast in underground is possible, but for Italy, for me, is impossible. Okay. Two hints for you. The first one is I suggest to start from extern project. Extern, if you know the project, is a UA research that analyze the cost of external energy. External energy in terms of DIT by terawatt-hour, the TV hash, to use this to make a good energy mix. And the last one is another hint that we have look to reduce the impact for climate change and so, but we have a big problem that is China that produces about 25% of CO2 of the world, and is like dumping for me. That is all.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Anders.
I would just like to confess to be emotional about this too, I think, because I think I mean, the beauty of seeing that little pill of uranium that can be the replacement of a ton of coal. Imagine that ingenuity. For me as a Dane, never having a nuclear plant here, I always enjoy when I pass one and traveling and see, look there, what humans can actually do. I think it's amazing. I visited a German plant in high school, and they told us that they had considered a commercial airline that could fly into the power plant without making a nuclear disaster. That was before 9/11. There's just so much control of bad cases that could happen in this technology. And as Pavel said, people don't think about, oh, it's green with my solar panel, but what happened when it was produced? What happens to the waste? I think nuclear power is just being held to a completely different set of standards for some reason. So yeah, I'm also emotional about this. I think we should, I think the technology is beautiful, and it's a shame not to use. And also, if you see a nuclear power plant in Germany or elsewhere, you can have houses quite close. I think you cannot measure any radioactivity almost outside the main door of the plant. Whereas if you burn coal, then you have uranium traces in the coal, and you send that through the chimney, basically. I think, how close do you have to be to the reactor before you can measure any high level of radioactivity? Maybe you can answer that, Claudia, because I got curious on it myself.
Well, we have two lined up to speak. Thank you, Anders, Claudia, and then Pavel. And we have a few questions coming up on the chat.
Okay, so there were a lot of things touched by, Silvano and Anders. So regarding, there's no radioactivity outside of the nuclear power plant. And there is some, let's say, radioactive dose that is given away from the core because of some, let's say, the corrosion products actually, but it's monitored and it's nothing dangerous to the operators. But yes, there is. So you have to imagine our core where it's the energy produced, and we have the cooling circuit, right? So due to the fact that the cooling circuit has to go away and go into the steam generator and then the turbine that drives the generator to produce our electricity, there is some radioactivity going around the cooling circuit, but it's nothing like, we know it, we monitor, we know where it is, and there is no harm to people. And of course, there is no radioactivity outside of a nuclear power plant, or anyway, it's just way, it's the background radiation is way higher. So it's just by walking on a green field, you receive more radiation anyway. But regarding, I think, Silvano, because I understand that Silvano has mentioned Gabon reactor, so he's aware of the fact that fission reactors are natural. It has happened naturally in a mountain and in the rocks in Africa. And we believe there are many other fission reactors in Brazil as well. And I wanted to say that that's what we do. Humans learn from nature. So one of the most advanced way to immobilize nuclear waste is learned from Gabon. So it is called synrock, synthetic rock. So what we do is by learning from nature and basically encapsulate the waste in rocks, simulant rocks, because we have seen that radionuclides didn't travel much at all in the millions of years where fissions occur naturally in the mountains in Africa. And I'm aware of the situation in Italy about nuclear, but I wanted to say to Silvano that it's not a technical issue. The fact that we do not have a solution to where to put our nuclear waste is not a technical problem. We know how to do it. In other countries, do it like as usual. It's unfortunately a political issue in Italy and an emotional issue because nuclear is just linked to politics and to, I don't know, votes. So unfortunately, this is why I'm here and what I try to explain to people, that nuclear should be considered just a technology, not a political tool. So we know how to store waste. Countries that do not know how to store waste is because they do not take the responsibility, because the politics don't do their job. Let's put it that way. Like, there is a solution and we have to do it. Europe is saying to us that we need to make a deposit. So we have to just build it. So there is a solution, Silvano. I tell you, it's just someone has to convince our government to start building it.
Thank you, Claudia. Well, speaking of emotional decisions, I mean, even if such things which we took for granted until a few years ago, 2 years ago, like vaccination, now have become such a huge emotional and political problem when it didn't used to be a problem. So yeah, emotional issues affect our lives in huge ways, politically emotional issues. Pavel.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to the one question Silvano asked me directly about economic or GDP models of how incentives in energy influence economies. Well, I'm not an expert, but I know of a few that, yeah, there's plenty of such models. I would say governments only like economic models and not really technical models. However, all of them are wrong. And I'm not saying that this is not a good thing to do models, but they are only about certain mechanisms that occur in reality in the socio-technical domain, while we can't really predict well how incentives or how certain technologies will influence GDP. Many people try, but it's always off.
Thank you, Pavel. Danny, you made a remark on the chat. Would you like to come up and say something or ask a question?
Yeah, thank you, Piotr. Well, the town where I live, in St. Nicholas, it's about 18 kilometers from nuclear plants in Belgium. Now, our federal government decided to close all those 4 plants till 2015. Imagine that this wasn't happened in 2015. What can we do to change that? Because they're getting older and older. So the oldest plants are more than 30 years old. If you want to stop them, how can we fix that we're not wasting or bring people in a dangerous position? Imagine we are, let's say, less than 20 kilometers from the borders of the Netherlands. What's going to happen when there is something happening in that town? How can we fix this? And the other thing is, wind energy and sun power is not the best solution for all of us. What do you think about it?
Thank you, Danny. Indeed, does anybody want to take it? Anders, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I think on the wind and solar, there's a tendency for people who support nuclear to badmouth wind and solar. There's nothing wrong with wind and solar. It works fine, but it cannot stand alone. It needs something that can also produce the energy when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And if there's too much produced, it can actually send the energy price negative if there's too much production. And when there's too little, then all other prices rocket. So there's something you can do it with better storage is one solution, but there's no wind and solar is a great contribution to the energy mix. And I just wanted shortly also to say to Silvano, first of all, thank you for speaking out yourself. There's absolutely no problem. None of us speaks English perfectly, but it worked perfectly fine. It's a great question. And I forgot to make this last point to your question when I asked Claudia, and that was with the nuclear waste, that if you have what a power plant has produced in maybe 30 years of waste, you have that inside the building, and still it's perfectly safe to be the neighbor, then how big is the problem with the waste really, when you look at it that way? I mean, you can calculate how many decades or centuries or even millennium it would be higher than background radiation. But if you can contain it so well, so the neighboring house is not in any way affected, then I don't think the problem is very big at all, actually. So yeah, and with the old plants, Danny, I think there is a risk that it's political, very hard to build a new plant, and then you let the old ones run maybe a little longer than would be smart. I think the main danger is still some cooling water leaking or something like that, not a meltdown. But yes, it's also good to repair, but it's also good to build something new from time to time, because just imagine how other technologies have developed during the last 30 or 60 years. I wouldn't like to buy a new laptop that was 30 years old, for instance.
Thank you, Anders. Pavel?
Yes, thank you. Well, I always have a problem with this kind of big announcement. By 2050, we're going to do this. By 2020, we're going to do this. Round numbers that never work. Well, indeed, there is a certain lifespan for a plant, any type of plant, and it's approximate. So when we monitor it, there is a moment when there needs to be a technical decision to shut it down. Of course, it might be influenced by some other factors, like, well, the ability to produce energy in other means. But in the end, it's not a decision that, hey, we're going to do it by this deadline. It should be a technical one on the capabilities of that particular technical setup. Which also brings me back to one of the Silvano's points on, I think it was called external energy. There's no such thing. This is imported energy. That might be how you understand it. It's a difficult thing. It's okay, you can buy it from abroad, because we still are looking into that from very national and very selfish perspective. But when it's produced elsewhere, it's just it is influenced by all the factors that we've been talking to today. And for instance, I very recently read an article about new wind farms in far Norway, which, well, in theory are great, because it's far north. There's nothing there, a lot of wind. You can produce a lot of electricity. However, they actually affect local indigenous population of the Sami people, who consider them not to be to affect their reindeer population. And also, they're only done for the fact for the sheer purpose of selling them to investors to produce energy and immediately export it abroad, because it's absolutely not needed in Norway. And thus, these kind of mechanisms are becoming a little bit dangerous. And we need to lose this national thinking of, oh yeah, this is my country and this is our energy landscape or electricity network. No, we are in this a little bit broader, and for the start, let's do that on European level, or at least European Union level, and then let's go a bit further.
Thank you, Pavel. Well, before I hand over to Ben and Claudia, who've asked to speak, I'm a great optimist when it comes to renewables, but I also had a reality check when I had solar panels installed on my roof a few months ago, that I contracted 3 kilowatts, and I get sometimes 2 kilowatts, 2.8 so far, the highest I obtained. And sometimes it's 400 watts or 800 watts. So however optimistic, is not enough to go off the grid and to say that I made a difference, either in my family budget or in the country's budget. The point is, and I'm in Spain at the moment, where you have 2,500 hours of sunshine per year. So yes, however much wishful thinking there is, we can't quite give up everything else. I must admit it myself, although reluctantly. Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, on the wind and energy question, I think there's a big role for that in the European Energy Union, as Pavel already mentioned. It doesn't help to just look at ourselves and see what if you can build a wind park in Norway. No, I think there's a possibility for all over Europe, like in the North Sea for wind energy. In the Sahara, we can build solar farms, hydroelectric in Central Europe. So there's a lot of possibilities if we look at all the continents. However, I do realize that it will not replace all the energy needs. Nuclear has to be a piece of the puzzle. And yeah, we need investments in the energy grid, how to transport the technology, because a power line across the Mediterranean Sea for the solar farm in the Sahara is going to be a challenge. Maybe hydrogen pipelines instead of gas pipelines. So we convert it to hydrogen and then convert hydrogen back into energy. That's a possibility. Anyway, I think the answer to that question is we need to have a smart mix of different types of energy, including nuclear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. We are something we are not touching much, because we are constantly concentrating on nuclear, because in the end that's the title of the discussion. But there is an enormous amount of power which is not being exploited in intelligent grids and grids. The fact that Europe is not interconnected as well as it could be, and the grids are not smart enough, we are not exploiting energy. Some days, some regions have a surproduction of wind power or solar power, and they have to dump it, sell it cheaply, or just dump it on the market. And other regions have a cloudy day, and there's always a sunny and a cloudy area in Europe which could be used to reduce our footprint and use less gas, which we are so short of, and we are being blackmailed with it. And particularly Morocco blocked an Algerian pipeline which was bringing gas to Spain a few months ago, because they have very bad relations with Algeria. They blocked an Algerian pipeline bringing gas to Spain, and the majority of the gas coming to Spain, therefore to Europe, is no longer available. They have to use tankers. There's only a smaller pipeline available directly from Algeria to Spain. So we are being blackmailed by unstable or authoritarian countries, not to mention the big bear up there, Russia, instead of getting our house in order and invest what we need to invest in producing the energy we need to produce. Claudia.
I was raising the hands also on the question of Danny. I think that I didn't quite understand if she was afraid of nuclear power plants being closed in 2050 in the country, but not the neighborhood. I didn't quite get the point. Did you get it?
Danny, could you perhaps explain what is exactly your point?
Well, the point, Claudia, is this: the border from Netherlands and the border from Belgium are very close to each other. So when there is happening a nuclear accident, by example, what is going to happen? Like a worst case, then we have when we have a Chernobyl problem. Yeah. How we gonna explain it, or how we gonna fix that with our neighbors? I mean, the Netherlands. That's the point.
Chernobyl accident cannot happen because literally there are no power plants with that design. That was faulty by design. So there could not be other Chernobyl. And but yes, so that's where we're here. I think we have to think about a global energy production, and as Piotr said, let's say an interconnected way of producing clean energy and electricity. And since the air is the same for all of us, so either we have emissions in the air, even you may have coal plants in Germany, but the emissions come to Belgium, you know what I mean? So the same point you think on nuclear power plants, you have to think that 4 million people die each year from CO2, NOx, SOx, PM, particulate matter. So the air is a global atmosphere. We are in the same world. So I totally agree with you. We have to make a decision based on technology, best technologies, and think that we need to preserve the environment for all of us, not only from the little country we live in. So yeah, it will be, of course, if there is a way to always have shine bright and always have wind, and if it would be feasible to transfer the electricity from wind and solar everywhere in the world, I would be happy. That would be ideal. But I don't think in any strategic plan from the International Energy Agency is admitted that. So the actual way to really do not go beyond 1.5 degrees C by 2050, increasing global temperature, it is still to use nuclear. So solar, wind, we need them. And if there is a way to optimize it and optimize the grid to transfer electricity, yes, it should be pursued for sure. But also we need to help them with other electricity sources, I think. But yeah, if there was a way to always have, 100% solar for each of us, I mean, I guess it would be, yeah, it would be ideal, but we need to consider that anyway, solar panels are really land intensive as well. So, and you need metals, so you still need the metals to produce them. So I don't think it's feasible.
Well, okay, thank you very much. Excuse me, Piotr.
Yeah.
But the point is, we may not have the intention to poison other people with nuclear energy, if you know what I'm talking about. So that's why I'm concerned about it, and that's why I also asked the question. That was the answer is okay. I can live with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Yes, well, solar panels actually, there's a huge potential on that, just on the roofs of the houses. Looking around me in Spain, there is perhaps at best 1 or 2% of the potential exploited when it comes just to roofs. And then you have huge solar fields on the ground by people who invested money and lost it when the PP actually introduced a tax on solar energy to try to save the coal economy and the coal burning power plants. Luckily, the current government has changed the policy, but that's blocked the situation for at least 10 years. Same with wind, there's still a lot of potential, but that wind is no good if we cannot export it to the countries which need it. So like France is not producing enough energy to export, and they're big exporters, but if they have maintenance of some of their reactors as at the moment, well, there's a shortage of energy all over Europe because we're all counting on it. So the interconnection is one of the keys. There are many more, but I think we are slightly running out of time here. So perhaps the panelists, would you like to say a few words to conclude your thoughts, your conclusion after this whole discussion this evening? Claudia, if you would like to start.
Thanks. No, I really enjoyed it, actually, the discussion today with you. And I think we actually were more or less on the same point, that we really want to take care of the environment as a global environment. So we need to add and implement solutions that can really decarbonize the entire world. And we all agree that we need nuclear. And I hope I have transmitted you a little bit of faith or a little bit of trust in nuclear technology and industry, since we know how to handle the waste. The nuclear power plants are safe. We are recycling now the waste. So I hope you will have a, let's say, a greener and brighter opinion on nuclear after the discussion today.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. You made a lot of very good points. I'm still concerned about nuclear, and I think a lot of people are still concerned about nuclear, and we shouldn't take it lightly. But you have made some very good points and very rational points. So thank you for participating. And everybody, don't forget to there's a link in our chat, fill our feedback, please, mainly to give suggestions, what you liked and what you didn't like about the session, but also to give suggestions about future sessions, because we have could have them every week, every other week, but we have them fairly regularly if you look at the past events. Pavel, as you are next, perhaps you could say a few words to conclude. What do you draw from this? What conclusion do you draw from this session?
Well, yes, thank you. It was, of course, a very interesting event, a discussion. To be honest, I'm not convinced it's a right question. Renewables or nuclear, I think to me it's still about making decisions as we go with the best of knowledge that we have at the moment. And currently it does seem like, well, we need to make to subsidize our energy mix with nuclear in at least several places, and how much is that needed? We shall see. What we know is a decision for many years, and that will stay with us, and then we shouldn't withdraw from it too soon. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to next events, hopefully also as a participant.
Thank you very much, Pavel. Ben.
Thank you for this very nice event. I think we had a very good discussion, fact-based and rationally, and I think we all agree that we need to invest in research and technology on improving our energy mix and delivering us from foreign dependency. Yeah, the main common points that we may have to look at is how we will improve our energy grid in Europe, how we will share our energy, and yeah, maybe we'll have a follow-up, who knows. It was a very nice discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And Anders.
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting seminar with different people's, also different professional views from different subject areas. That has been very interesting indeed. I heard both Pavel and Piotr talk about the connectivity of the network. On the electricity map I showed in my slide, you can also see the movement across the borders. And as far as I can see with the naked eye, it's something like 5 or maybe even 10% sometimes of the energy production in the country that can be exported to the neighboring countries. That is actually far more than I thought it would be. So it does actually happen that we trade electricity electric energy with each other. It actually happens every day. You can even see it in live. It's called, I find that very funny to look at how the energy is transported all over Europe. We can probably build even better connections so it happens more, but it does actually happen. It is a place where the European Union is really doing a difference here with the interconnectivity of the networks. But thank you so much for all the contribution. It's been very interesting, and I'm at least more wise about it than I was before after the seminar. So thanks very much, all of you.
Yeah, I hope we have all learned. Thank you very much, Anders. We have all learned something. And
thanks for the questions too. They have also been great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for the participants for an active participation, and above all, Claudia, for joining us here. And I hope we can come back to the subject as the situation evolves, because there's so many nuclear plant closures which are planned. Switzerland is closing down all of its nuclear plants. It was planned for several years now, but it was a referendum and they decided to close the nuclear plants, and they don't know what to do with it because they don't have enough production. It's not raining, and the main source after nuclear in Switzerland is hydropower, and it's not raining enough to refill the tanks, the dams. So there's a big problem looming. We're buying energy from France. What if France cannot sell this energy? So we will have some crucial decisions to make in this months and very next few years to come. And we have so many subjects we haven't touched because we didn't have the time. It would take probably a whole school year, whole university year to touch on all of them, like as we just lightly touched on grids, wind, the thorium reactors, the breeder reactors, etc., which you just mentioned en passant. It's fascinating subjects. So I hope we can go back to it soon. And thank you very much, everybody. Thanks to all the participants. We had a very good participation tonight. And I have a recording. I will be editing it soon and posting on Facebook and YouTube. So those who couldn't watch tonight can catch up. Good night to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Nice evening. Bye bye.